Hey friends, okay, so let's talk about the Maeve. We're going to be making that together today, so let's talk about why I even designed the Maeve skirt to start with. So Maeve is a pretty simple skirt pattern, but that is exactly what I wanted her to be, because I am in desperate need of more clothes I can wear on an everyday basis, because a lot of the clothes that I make and even buy are things that are for special occasions and I can't just wear on an everyday basis, and that's definitely something that I need. So she's great because she's kind of simple, but she's also really chic and cute at the same time. So she's not just a boring staple, she's like a cute staple. So what's nice about Maeve is that she is customizable in several different ways. So to begin with, you can either make the skirt with 0 slits, 1 slit, or 2 slits. It's totally up to you. And then if you are choosing to do the versions that have the slit included, then you can choose if you want to have a little micro slit, a medium one, or like a super high one. Completely customizable. I've included little notches where I think that it would look nice to put the height of the slit, but that's also just a suggestion. Once you try on the skirt, you can decide how high or how low that you want the slit to go. The second way is that the skirt comes in 2 different lengths. It comes in a short length and then a version that is 3 inches longer. So if you want to wear the skirt for work or you just feel more comfortable in a slightly longer skirt, then that will be the option for you. You can still do slits in the longer version too. That's not something off the table in that version. And the third way that you can customize the skirt is that you can, instead of doing a facing like the directions explain, you can actually do the skirt fully lined. So if you prefer the professional look of a lined skirt, it does take a little bit more effort, but it does have a nice clean inside as well. Then I'm going to show you how to do both methods today because I like them both and I go between both of them. So I'm going to show you how to do the facing method on the green skirt, and then for my tweed skirt, I've done it lined. So you will get to see both of those methods today. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into sewing the Maeve. Start by downloading the Maeve sewing pattern through Adobe Acrobat. This one is free. You're going to click on this little tab over here on the left for the layers. Select just your size and the Maeve skirt layer there. If you toggle it off, then a lot of the things disappear. So this way it makes it a lot easier just to see your size and you're not getting confused with a bunch of extra lines. Then go to your printing window. It should be at 100%. Make sure it's not fit or scaled in any other way. And then you're good to print. Double check that the test square at the top is the correct size to make sure everything got printed correctly, and then you're ready to go. Just cut off the bottom and the right side for this tiled pattern, and then you can stick them together. Okay, so you're gonna begin by matching up the lines, taping it together by layering those 2 pages over each other, and then you're gonna continue for the rest of the pattern. There's not too many pages, so it shouldn't be too much of a pain. Some patterns are super big, but this one is just fine. So here I am cutting out all the pattern pieces. I'm using an older version of the pattern, so it doesn't have all the markings like you have on your pattern. So I'm going to cut out the back here, and it is not cut on the fold, but I am now marking the very end of the dart there and the dart tip. So I've snipped a couple notches to know where to fold in the future, and now I'm marking the dart tip to know where to finish sewing when we sew the dart in our next steps. I'm using some tailor's chalk, but you can use whatever, pen, pencil, something hopefully that will wash away. Now I'm going to cut out the back facing. Again, it is not cut on the fold because the zipper will be going in the back. Now I'm cutting out my 2 front pieces. And important to note, the center front is cut on the fold, and same with the front facing, also cut on the fold. Now I'm marking the notches and deciding how high I want my slit, and I've decided I want it there. So I've made sure to mark the notch like that. And if you are cutting on pattern fabric, make sure these 2 side front pieces are mirrored of each other. Now I'm serging off all the side seams to make sure nothing frays in between this step and the next. And you can still see the notches, so if you want to recut them, you can, but if not, it's okay. So now I'm folding using those previous notches from before where we marked the dart and the dart tip, pinning the dart tip right there, matching the notches, folding to create the dart. And now if you want some extra help, you can trace a line from the notches to the dart tip, so when you're sewing you have a guideline. I'm readjusting the pins here just to make it easier to sew. Here I've just marked it again with the yellow line to make it easier to see, and then we're going to bring this over to our sewing machine and begin by back tacking to secure at the top. And then we're going to sew down, removing pins as we sew, and gently getting closer and closer to sewing off the edge, trying to make it as gradual as possible. And then do not back tack at the end, instead tie those long strings in a knot. Now we're going to press our back dart towards the side seam. So now let's focus on the front again. Let's grab one of our side fronts and the center front, and I'm going to pin those together, matching the notches we previously cut. And once I find that notch that marks where I want to place my slit, I'm going to put 2 pins there just to remind myself when sewing to stop there and back tack and secure it. So if you want 2 slits, you would do that on the same side. If you want 0 slits, you're gonna sew all the way down on both sides. Totally up to you. And the height as well, totally up to you. So now I've sewn down this side completely because I only want the 1 slit, and then I will continue to the other princess seam and only sew down to the pin that I marked before and back tack to secure at this point. And then we're going to bring this over to the ironing table and press those seams open. And for the slit, just continue pressing open the seam allowance. And then repeat that on the other princess seam as well. So now it's nice and beautifully pressed. And then once it is pressed, let's continue working on the slit. Let's pin that slit in place if you are even sewing one. So I've just used a few pins because it's pretty secure already with the pressing, but let's just be extra sure. So we're gonna sew like this. Starting here, we're gonna pivot at that top there and come back down. We wanna maintain the same seam allowance though while we're sewing it. So here I am sewing up the one side, and then I'm going to leave my needle in the fabric, lift the presser foot and turn. I've realized here that it's not enough to maintain the same seam allowance, so I'm sewing just a few stitches more, pivoting again and doing the same thing. Now I pivoted one more time, and I'm gonna sew back down the other side of the slit to secure it in place, and there we go. This is a great time to sew the side seams of the facing together. Let's join our front pieces with the back pieces by lining them up right sides together and then pinning along the side seam. And then we're gonna just sew that with our regular seam allowance. Here I'm showing you how important it is to press your seams. The left one is pressed and the right one is not, so let's press it. So I begin by pressing the seam open like this, but then I end up folding it back over so both of the seam allowances are facing towards the center back. Now let's work on this center back seam. So we're going to be installing the zipper into the seam, and there is a notch there to indicate where the zipper will end. And below that we will use a regular stitch, and above that where the zipper will go, we're going to use a basting stitch, or the longest stitch length on your sewing machine. So here I am stopping my regular stitches by back stitching, and then I'm going to increase the length of my stitch by going to the highest amount, the longest length on my machine, which is 5. And then I continued sewing the rest of the way where the zipper will be placed. So now I'm going to flip my skirt inside out, and we're going to give that seam a good press. So now that the seam is pressed open, let's grab our invisible zipper and align that with the seam. And I'm going to do this by slowly centering the zipper along the middle of the seam. And then I'm going to pin right where the notch is. My zipper is a little bit long, but honestly I think it makes it a little bit easier in these next steps. So now I'm going to hand baste the zipper just to the seam allowance, just to hold it in place. You could pin here, but basting is really convenient and doesn't get in the way. So now that it's basted in place, we're going to flip it right side out again, and we're going to remove those machine basting stitches that we sewed previously. And then now we're going to unzip the zipper, and now you can see that if we undo it and unroll just a little bit to have the seam allowance out, we know where we need to sew. So bring this over to your machine, switch out your regular foot for an invisible zipper foot. If you do not have one of these are amazing. Make sure to shift your needle into the center. And there you go, you're going to unroll the teeth as you sew. And once you get towards the bottom, just go as far as you can. I kind of did an unzipping here, which is nice when the zipper is longer, like what I was saying before. So just keep going as far as possible. I kind of did like a little somersault with my fabric, and now it's kind of inside out again. Just do whatever you need to do to get to that zipper notch, and then back tack. You can see the pin that marks the notch. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. This is a pretty tight little area, so I'm sorry the filming is not the best for this, but I hope you understand the idea. So just go as far as you can, back tack, try to get to that same zipper notch, and now we're all sewn in place. And then you're gonna get the zipper like this. It's like a little somersault. And then zip it up, and she looks so good. No bump at the bottom, which a lot of you tell me is a big problem when you sew the invisible zipper. So this method really helps with that. So let's remove the hand basting stitches. And if you find that your zipper is just a little bit long for your liking, it is super easy to shorten it. So I've increased my stitch length again to the maximum, and I'm just gonna sew back and forth to create a little mound of threads that will now act as the zipper stopper. And then you can just simply grab your scissors and cut the excess right off the bottom here. Mine was not too long anyways, but just as a demonstration. And now we're going to move on to attaching the facing. Begin by pinning the side seams to make sure that those seams are stacked on top of each other, the side seam of the facing and the side seam of the skirt. And then just extend and match the front facing to match the front of the skirt, just making sure it's all even. And then pin along the back, but the zipper is a little bit of a special area. So I'm gonna zoom in to show you. So we're going to, I'm just pinning to secure to see how much extra we have. There's about 1/2 inch extra that you're going to fold over and pin in place. This is going to help us have a nice finished edge to our zipper. It's going to look just like this. So the zipper is how it should lay, and now our facing is covering that edge. And we're going to repeat on the other side just so you can see it again. So folding over that back seam allowance and making sure it covers the zipper. And then here I am just showing you again, this is what it's going to look like before we sew it using a normal seam allowance. So begin by back tacking like always to secure your stitches in place, and then sew with a regular seam allowance the rest of the way around the waist. Now that the facing is attached to the skirt, we're going to do something special to help reduce the thickness of that seam. So we're going to do some seam grading by cutting just half of the seam allowance, and I'm using the part of the facing and cutting it about in half. Now we're going to push the seam allowance towards the facing, and we would stitch right next to that seam line from before, and this is called understitching. It helps the facing roll over and stay out of sight when you are wearing the skirt. You can also just fold over the skirt and do some top stitching, which would be right along here. And you will see this on both the front and on the inside of the skirt. The understitching that I'm doing here will only be visible on the facing side, and so you will not see it when you are wearing the skirt. So you can see that I've stitched just about 1/8 away from the previous stitch line, and you can see how it kind of helps crisp up the facing and now you won't see it on the skirt side. Then we can take this over to the ironing board and give it a good press. And then the only thing that we need to do here is that our facing is popping up just a little bit around the zipper. So I'm going to hand tack that in place by sewing the facing to just the seam allowance of the zipper and tying that off. Now it's laying a lot flatter and it shouldn't just pop up out of the blue. So now our skirt is almost done. The only thing we have left is to work on the hem. And so the hem of the skirt is 1 inch. So we're gonna work by folding up 1/2 inch to begin with, pressing all the way around and then folding up another 1/2 inch. If you have a slit, just be careful that the hem is not popping out from behind the slit and it's not visible. So we're going to press all the way around, and I like to pin. And then when it is time to come back around, you're going to remove the pin, press. It's good to use some steam. And then I like to pin it again just to hold it in place. And then I'm stitching as close as I can to the top of the fold of the hem, and we're going to sew all the way around. And now she is complete and she looks so beautiful. So our version with the facing is completely done, and now we are ready to tackle our version with lining. So I'm going to be using a tweed for this and a pattern. So if you're interested in making this skirt with a pattern, then this is the tutorial part for you. I'm showing you that you do not want to cut that middle part because we're going to take the pattern and fold it over. When working with patterns, it's super important to make sure you have everything perfectly lined up and you just don't want to have one of your lines askew from the very start. So I'm cutting just the half, and then I'm going to cut my notches where I want my slit to be. In this case, I'm using the longer version here, and there are different notches for the long and the short version, just as suggestions where I think you could cut. So I'm cutting here. And then I'm going to take my pattern and flip it and just repeat that exact same thing, but I just am really hyper focusing on making sure things are aligned since this pattern is super directional and I need to line things up perfectly. So the trickier part here is now matching up our center front and the side front pieces. I know that there is a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so I'm trying to account for that and making sure that the pattern will line up after the pieces are sewn together. Once I've decided where that is, I'm going to pin in place, and here you can see if I fold over the 1/2 seam allowance in place where it will be sewn, they should line up. And then I will repeat that for the other side front piece. I was using limited amounts of fabric, so I just did my best to pattern match in this case. And so I was trying to do the longer length, but because I was working with limited fabric, like I said before, I ran out trying to pattern match. So I'm actually reverting back to the shorter length, and that's what I was showing you there. So now we're doing lining. So we've cut the exact same pattern, but in our lining fabric. Now I've sewn it up with the darts, and I've sewn those center front seams and the side seams and even up the zipper seam. And I repeated that on our main fabric. So now we have 2 skirts, and we're going to flip the lining so that the wrong sides are facing out. And then we're going to put the nice one inside of our lining fabric and shimmy, shimmy, shimmy until it's all inside. And now we're going to pin the hem. So we're gonna go around and match the lining to our outside fabric and just make sure everything's all aligned. Once you have pinned all the way around, whether you have slits or not, in this case I have 2 slits, you're going to bring this back to your machine and stitch using the 1 inch hem. And in my case, I was using a 1/2 inch because I ran out of fabric, but normally you'd use 1 inch. And now we're gonna sew up the slits. So you're gonna sew using the normal seam allowance of a 1/2 inch, and sew until you reach the previous stitch lines, and then back tack, and then repeat on the other side. And if you have 2 slits, you're gonna need to do this again. And if you have no slits, you can just ignore this step. So now I am sewing that very top part of the slit. And now you see we've sewn our slit completely. And now we're gonna trim the corners to help us flip it as nicely as possible. And then we're gonna flip it so that it is right side out. And we want to wiggle, wiggle, wiggle those corners, putting the lining back inside. This is how the skirt's gonna look in the end. And we're just wiggling and trying to get the seams to lay flat. And then I found if I poke out the corners with my scissors, it worked pretty well. Next is to bring your skirt over to the ironing board, and you want to push the lining so you don't see it from the outside, and we're actually seeing just a little bit of our outer skirt fabric and giving that a press. And then I like to come to the outside and just make sure everything is looking really nice and we can't see the lining from this side. It's time to focus on putting in our invisible zipper, which is always a little bit of a fun adventure when you have lining. So let's begin by flipping both of our skirts inside out so we are looking at the wrong side or the inside. So I've already pressed my zipper seam and I'm going to lay my zipper along this seam. You can hand baste it in place like we did before if that's easier for you. In this case, I'm just pinning because I think I felt a little bit lazy, but do what works best for you. And then I'm going to unzip it and continue pinning and securing it along this seam. The most important thing to keep in mind when you're pinning an invisible zipper into place is that the teeth should be facing away from the edge of the fabric and never on the same side as the edge. And then we're gonna give this a sew by rolling the teeth with our fingers again. And now I'm flipping things right side out and I'm going to zip up my zipper once I can find it down in there. And then I zipped it up and now I'm just matching the zipper to this part of the skirt. So matching the right part of the seam allowance to that side of the zipper, pinning in place. I think it's nice when the zipper is zipped up. It really helps you show yourself how it's supposed to lay and so things don't get all twisted. And then once you get closer to the bottom, it's nice to unzip so you can get down in there. And then we're gonna sew that side just like before. And I did a little bit of finagling so I could get as close to the zipper notch where it should end as possible, and it's always a good idea to unzip the zipper when you're doing this. And then of course you're going to want to back tack to secure it in place. Now that we've sewn both of those sides, we are going to zip it back up, twisting to make sure everything is aligned. And now we have the first part of our invisible zipper done. Now let's focus on attaching the invisible zipper to the lining. So the lining is also sewn at that bottom portion of the zipper. And I folded over the fabric so that the right side of the lining is touching the part of the zipper. That is very important because we're making like a sandwich here. And we're working by going through the waist area because it is the only seam that is still open. So just continue working down and grabbing the fabric and pinning. And then we're going to bring this over to the machine. And if it's easier for you, you could always use a regular zipper foot, but you can use your invisible zipper foot for this too. So now we've sewn that, and you can see that we do have a nicely finished half of our invisible zipper. Let me just wiggle this so you can see it. So now we have one side, our left side is nicely finished with our outside fabric and the lining fabric, and it zips, very important. So now we're going to work on the other part of our invisible zipper, doing that one more time to the other side. So let's fold over the lining so the right side is facing out. Then we're going to fold the zipper and we're going to make those two sides kiss each other, touch each other, and you're going to pin them together and then do the same thing. Just continue working down, making sure the right side of the facing is touching that part of the zipper. And once you have pinned as far as you can and all the way down, you bring it back over to your machine and sew that side of the zipper. All right, now that we've sewn that part of the zipper, we're just going to make sure everything's nice and even and give her a zip. Ah, so satisfying when it actually works. So now, there's the inside. If we unzip, now the only thing that's left open is our waist seam. So let's conquer that right now. So in order to finish this, we are going to hand stitch it by folding over a 1/2 inch here with the lining fabric and pressing all the way around the skirt waist area. And then we're going to repeat that on the tweed fabric as well. I like to pin as I go, and I just keep measuring to make sure that I am pressing at a 1/2 inch. And then of course I am tucking in the zipper also over here, that extra part that doesn't have any zipper teeth, it's just that little tab at the top. And we're gonna press everything over again a 1/2 inch. Once we're done, it should look like this. And then we're going to double up our thread and we are going to do a ladder stitch starting over here on one end. And to do a ladder stitch, you're gonna catch about a 1/4 inch of fabric of our outer fabric. And then you're gonna come over to the lining fabric and catch about a 1/4 inch as well. And then just keep repeating this back and forth until you've closed up this whole waist area. The key to making the ladder stitch look good is keeping the stitch lengths consistent and going directly across between the lining and the outer fabrics, and that will help it look really nice. And once you come to the end, you're going to tie it off with a little knot or two just to make sure it is extra secure. Now that you've finished your ladder stitch, all the seams should be perfectly sewn up. Everything should look nice and neat. And you can really appreciate the professional look of doing the lining. And the last thing I want to say for doing the lining, which I'm showing off here because I just feel like it looks so nice, is one last thing to help make sure the lining doesn't show in the hem area when you're wearing the skirt is to push up the lining, and we're going to go along the center back seam and the side seams. We're gonna push it like this and make sure that you can see a little bit of the tweed fabric or your outer fabric, and we're going to pin that in place. And then what we're gonna end up doing is going and sewing from the outside along that stitch line, along that seam, just to secure the lining in place. That way it has less of a tendency to roll out and show while you're wearing it, since we didn't have anything that really prevents it from rolling out at the bottom. So you don't have to go very far. I only went probably 2 or 3 inches. This is how it looks on the inside and from the outside. Okay, so if you made it all the way to the end, we've sewn both of our skirts. We've sewn the white version with the lining and the version with the facing. And so now we have a green and a tweed skirt, and hopefully you also have your own Maeve skirt, your very own Maeve skirt. If you have any questions, just please drop them in the comments below. And if you have any pattern suggestions, I'm always happy to hear them. And honestly, I'm just happy if you found this video helpful or if you feel inspired, then that's all I hope to achieve. If you have anything you'd like to add or let me know, then just drop a comment below. And thank you so much for watching.